Hey, go. Close.
Good evening. Welcome to our Q&A event. We're the Christian Union, and tonight we've got an event. It's a Q and answer question and A event. We're going to be looking at the theme of, in a world of fake news, how can I know what is true? And we're going to have 4 panelists from their church leaders in Guildford, and they're going to help us help answer some of your questions. So some of you have already been sending questions in, and you actually have the chance to do so now. If along the bottom of the screen, we're going to have a link. It's linktr.ee/USCU. And on there, you can follow the link to submit your own question on slido.com. Throughout the night, we're going to be picking out some of those questions that you answer in and posing them to the church leaders and see what they think. Hopefully, you've got with you a nice warm beverage, perhaps, or something stronger. So it's going to be a good night. We'll be wrapping up well before 9. So home for bedtime. Without further ado, shall we introduce our 4 panelists? Tonight we have Lily, Chris, Phil and Claire coming to us from around the city. I suppose I'll start with you, Chris, in the top left. Could you just tell us your name and a bit about you?
Yeah, hi. How's it going, everyone? Thanks so much for sort of having me a part of the panel. It's really good to be here. I'm really honoured to be part of all that you're doing. And yeah, I'm Chris. I'm married. I have 2 children, and I lead Hope Church. And I've been enjoying doing that for the last couple of years, along with a fantastic team. And yeah, it's a great church here in the city, and it's a great opportunity for me to be able to engage with lots of different people from different backgrounds and different places, from different ages and different ethnicities as well. So it's good to hang out with you guys. Great
to know we do have a diversity in Guildford, even though it doesn't always seem like it. Let's jump across to Claire. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Claire. So I didn't get the privilege of going to university at Surrey, I'm sad to say. I went to university in Reading. But my day job is things just like this, is to support students, part of Christian unions, to help think about the big questions of life. So I'm based here in Guildford. If my window was facing the right direction, I could see the cathedral, but the cathedral is literally a 5-minute walk from my house. And I love engaging with the big questions that people have. So it's a real joy to be on this panel tonight.
Great to have you. Phil, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm Phil. I have a few hats, roles that I wear. What am I saying? So I'm a fellow leader with Chris at Hope Church in Guildford, and but I'm also work with Lily with Friends International, and so I'm on campus a decent amount, supporting international students, and part of the chaplaincy team on campus as well. So those are the many roles, or as I was trying to go with the metaphor, hats that I wear. There we go. I got it right. There we go.
but no hat this evening, we see.
No, I could have worn one, but I decided not to, and just show off the lockdown haircut that I'm now sporting.
Late to the game, but it's great.
Well, it's the second lockdown,
Lily?
so it's the second haircut.
Yeah, lockdown locks.
Lily, John, go for it.
Yes, yeah, good evening, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm Lily. I'm the center team leader here for the team of Friends International in Guildford. I've been working with students for the past 10 years. I've come from Germany over to the UK about 7 years ago. I have a son who is 2, who loves to run around and play football and gives away sticks to people like Barney, and then realizes that he didn't want to give away the stick and threw a massive tantrum, which is a lot of fun. Yes, and I'm also an international Christian chaplain on campus, as Phil already said that he is as well. So yeah, on campus quite regularly, which is a lot of fun. And I think that's everything there's to say for now.
That is awesome. That's far too much about you guys. We're going to get into some questions soon. I don't regularly hang out with 2-year-olds, for the record, as well. So let's clarify that one. So yeah, tonight we're looking at fake news, post-truth, truth, what it means in this world that we're in at the moment. In 2016, Oxford Dictionary chose post-truth as their word of the year, defining it as something relating to circumstances which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion or personal belief. You don't have to look far to see this. Election losers, denying poll results, coronavirus conspiracies, and vaccine distrusts. And that's just all in the past few months, really. So we live in a world that's increasingly difficult to find truth, to find what is true, to separate misinformation from tweaked statistics, from verifiable statements. It feels like whilst before we got information from the authorities, the governments, scientists and specialists and professionals, they would kind of dictate the truth to us. And now it's all up for grabs within the hands of the people. So for the first time, instead of forcing our own views to conform to the facts, we're looking for things which align with our own views, is what it can feel like sometimes. And so in this whirlwind of fake news, how can we find the truth? Is such a thing even possible? Is it even out there? I suppose, Chris, if I jump back to you, would you sort of have a sort of response to that topic that you want to share with us at all to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the real question is exactly that. How do you know that anything is true? And that was, I guess, a big question for me when I was exploring faith and trying to figure out, is there more to life than kind of what I see around myself? When I was sort of 15, 16 years old, I was heavily involved in sort of drinking. I used to live in Brighton. I was involved in the kind of party scene. I would explore all the kind of joys to be had of life, getting stuck in with girls and drink and all that might give. But there was always a kind of longing, I guess, a longing for something greater. I just figured that if I lived the next 60 years of my life like this, that I wasn't convinced that I would be particularly fulfilled. And so I was taught in schools that, we were basically here by accident. We were a product of random chance, that we were just a smattering of cells, and that the time that we have on Earth is basically the kind of end root of that is meaningless. And so I started to explore. First of all, when I look around, when I see the intricacies of the universe, when I see how everything's made and how everything's ordered, when I look at the cultures and how basically across all cultures, whilst we were very different, we still had a basic set of values, like murder is bad, or doing things to children is wrong. there's these things that I think, how is that possible that many people from all different places have evolved to have the same set of kind of core beliefs and values? And so I started to basically explore what that was. And first of all, exploring, is there a God? You know, if there's no God, what does that mean for life? And then if there is, um, who is the right God to believe? You know, is it just that in the UK many people believe in Christianity because of the past, the upbringing, or is there something to hold on to? Is there some truth there to kind of dig into? If I grew up somewhere else, would I just grow up believing in a different religion, and so on? And so I started to explore that question, and over several years, I did end up putting my trust in the God of the Bible. And I guess there was three key things that led me there. One was is asking the question, is there any evidence? And so looking at the Bible, is there any historical evidence for the Bible being true, for the stories of Jesus? What alternatives could there be for us seeing 2 billion people on this planet believing in Jesus? Is, you know, all the different questions that come up with that. What about the resurrection, which I know some people have asked? What about other things? Is there any evidence for the Bible being true? Second one is, what about my experience? What, like I've mentioned, the values that we might have of equality, of fairness, of justice, especially in the West. And what about this desire that we will have for more? What about this pain that we feel when we suffer unjustly? All these things, my experience of the world tells me that perhaps there is something, we're made for something greater than what we have. And actually we see that all across, you know, especially in America, that this desire for something better is placed on politicians. And so to not have the politician I believe is going to deliver that in power, well, actually that's horrendous. And so I need to protest, I need to cancel people, I need to march the streets to make sure that my politician comes in, because if they don't, then the whole world is a disaster. And then thirdly, which makes the most sense, which has the kind of the most coherent worldview? When we put everything together, suffering, I don't know, creation, our existence, our purpose, when we look at the values and things that everyone has, is there a worldview that kind of wraps that all together, that makes sense of it all in a coherent way? And having explored that, I believe that the God of the Bible and the Bible is a coherent narrative, even though it was written over 1,500 years, even though written by over 40 different authors. It still has a consistent narrative all the way through, that God is real, that he has created this world, and that we have a greater purpose than just to live, eat, sleep, and die. There you go.
I don't know, man. That sounds pretty good, but we'll suspend that thought. Thank you so much. Great to hear from you. And a little reminder, guys, just pop some questions on the slider. If you've got something that's nagging your ear, or been nagging it your whole life, this is the chance to get these wise guys to give their tuppence worth. But yeah, thank you, Chris. I think we're going to briefly try and whiz around the whole group and then get onto questions ASAP. But Lily, would you just like to share a little bit about your thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, I actually was not listening, thinking about this last night as I was going to sleep, because that's when I always think about my talks or anything that comes up the next day. And as I was thinking about this whole topic, I was actually thinking that we've been living with fake news for a really long time. And I'm talking actually about those news, or that reality that we thought we're living in, that our lives are predictable, that our lives are safe, that we are secure in our jobs, with our health, that our economy is stable. And I think actually these last few weeks and months have taken away those fake news, and have taken away our rose-tinted glasses that we've been having on our eyes. I think in a certain way, those rose-tinted glasses that tell us that life is secure, this is all okay, and we can rely on things, when actually the reality is And I think we are facing this right now in a really hard way. Life is unpredictable. And in being realistic, we can't really plan too much into the future. So actually what I was thinking is, in this time of fake news, when the biggest fake news has been taken away and we're certainly staring into this reality, what can give us hope? And I actually have a verse written on a bracelet I have here, which I got after I have miscarried earlier this year. Is really intense, but I'm happy to talk about it. But actually, it says on this little bracelet, it says about faith brings our hope into reality, which is the beginning of a Bible verse, which talks about the hope and the faith that we have in a good God, that eventually this bad stuff that is happening is going to come to an end, and our hope is founded on this person of Jesus and on the Bible as well. And very happy to talk a little bit more about this, but actually that's the point that I wanted to get across, that in this world of fake news, when the biggest fake news is that we've been thinking that this is predictable, this is safe, it's actually been taken away, and we're staring in this unpredictable life, in the unpredictable next few weeks, and in this world, where is this hope? And I believe that it is Jesus, and it is a good God who loves and cares for us. That's all I have to say for now.
Look forward to some more later, I hope. Thanks so much. Claire, I'm dying to hear your thoughts. I know you've been prepping this all week, really, non-stop. So
Why me, Barney, over everybody else? It's because
we'll get
Barney
some
and
good
I,
stuff from you, I'm sure.
we often will be sitting in the same coffee shop, having deep, meaningful conversations with different people. And then occasionally Barney and I will have a chat about culture and life and worldview. So maybe that's why. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, that fake news term? I think what Lily said was really true, that actually we've been living with fake news for so long. I hadn't really comprehended that until Lily just said that now. I think when preparing for this and just thinking about fake news, all I feel is tired. Like tired of scrolling through things and not knowing if they're real or not. Knowing that I have to do loads and loads of research to discover if something's true. I think there's things that have come into our culture recently that really highlight the need for truth. I wonder, as you're sitting tonight on your Zoom call or in your room, do you think truth really matters? I think a couple of things have shown us that it does. Take Greta, for example, Greta Thunberg, the Swedish activist. Greta did the research. She learned about the science of the changing climate and knew that she had to act to change. And so I think she was 15 or 16 at the time, started protesting outside of the Swedish parliament. Greta did her research and realised what was true, and that research led to change. Now loads of us know about this girl that's 17 that's fighting for climate change and being active in that. And then we've already mentioned it a little bit. We don't want to talk too much about US politics, but I think it's worth bringing to our attention. I was following it really closely last week, partly because I'm allowed to vote in the US election, and so my heart's half there, half of the time. But I thought what was really interesting was the things that I was seeing either from my family and friends or just from the general sphere of Instagram was count every vote. Alongside everything that was going along in the election were people asking to count every vote, make sure that what is being voted is true. And then there was all this stuff caught up in election fraud. To be honest, scrolling through some of the tweets from Donald Trump, there were these little extra bits at the bottom from Twitter themselves saying this claim is disputed and might be contending with election fraud. Isn't that interesting? And Barney, I think you already talked about this a little bit, how we used to find our truth in kind of authority, in kind of bigger things, but now we're having to create our own. Where do we find truth? But what about when it matters? Being a Christian for me means a lot of things. Following the person of Jesus means a lot of things. But some things that I love about Jesus is what he said about himself and about the world. he said one thing which is a bit random, but also really interesting, and not many people attest this to who Jesus is. He says this, that you will know the truth and that will set you free. Isn't that interesting, that truth brings freedom? I don't know about you. You might have loads of questions about Christianity. You may have none. You may think Jesus is real. You may think he's not real. But it's worth questioning. As Chris said earlier, he came to conclusions, he thought about it. We think Christianity is worth investigating, and that starts with the person of Jesus. Thanks.
Awesome. For sure. I think Phil, your time has come. Give us a little thing.
I'll see what I'm going to do. I don't think I'm going to be able to say anything too much different from what's been already said. But I think when thinking about truth, I wonder how I could prove to you that what you see in front of you is true, is real. Am I a recording? Or you could always be skeptical of that, and I could try and prove by holding up a newspaper or looking at my watch and showing you the date. You could always be skeptical of it, and you could continue down this road of being skeptical and just think, well, Phil's not really there. I am, but you have to take it on a few things. You have to trust that technology is working in the way that you think it is, and you have to trust that your senses are being true to your experience, and you have to possibly have faith in a few people who you might know at the CU, or if you're watching and I've shared you the link, then hopefully you know who I am, and you can tell that this is a fair representation of what you know, who you know to be Phil Duncalf. So knowing what is true isn't necessarily being 100% certain, and I'm not even sure being 100% certain of anything is actually possible. We can be as skeptical as we like, and oftentimes, especially online, we are almost skeptical of everything. So the claim tonight from a Christian perspective is actually asking the question in response, or what makes the best sense of the world around us? What makes the best sense of history? What makes the best sense of my experience and your experience? And then it requires a bit of trust. And so there's things like science that can take us so far. We can observe things, we can test things out, but even that requires an element of faith. And by faith, I mean trust. Trust on people that have done the experiments that you're building on. Trust that the natural laws of the world will operate in the way you expect them to. And even so, with science, it kind of works in a bit of a weird way. It works in a way that proves something else to be wrong. So scientific truth is only true for as long as someone doesn't disprove it. So even that is a little bit potentially of a flimsy foundation. So when it comes to news and things like that, we can be skeptical. We try and have a balanced perspective. Unfortunately, even neutral news is often slightly biased because the people writing things are human. But when it comes to things like religion, I think there are good things that we can do. We can read around, we can test, we can look at history, and we can look at others' experience. So basically, in short, with Christianity, it's looking at things like the eyewitness testimonies of those who lived when Jesus was around. It's looking at the history of the early church. It's looking at the fact that the vast majority of historians, both secular and Christian, and all through the centuries since Jesus was alive, would agree that Jesus existed and died. And the question is, well, what makes the best sense of all of the facts around that time period? And I would argue, well, that's where the resurrection comes in. And I think that's really my experience of Christianity, is it makes the best sense because Christianity is also the claim that truth can be known. It's not a fact necessarily, but it's a person. And so the invitation is you can know Jesus personally. And so Christianity isn't just facts and history. I think there are good facts. I think there's good history behind it, but it's also experience. And so Jesus is someone who, well, if the resurrection is true, is alive today and it can be known. And so the invitation is then, well, if that's true, why don't you try praying? Why don't you try church? Why don't you try reading the Bible and see if these claims of both historic evidence with personal experience are something you can then put your faith or your trust in. And I think with all those things together, I've learned that I can put my faith in Jesus. There you go.
Thanks a lot, guys. Some good points there. Hopefully, that's made you think at home a little bit. We've got a few more questions coming in, and you can also upvote them on the Slido. So if you fancy one of the questions in particular, you can try and send it to the top, and we'll try and cover those. But yeah, if you've just joined, then welcome. We just heard from a few of our panelists for tonight's Q&A. We're looking at the topic of, in a world of fake news, how can I know what's true? And it's really interesting because ultimately we're asking all these questions, and it's quite meta because the questions are trying to obtain something relating to this truth that, like Phil was saying, we're trying to grasp and we can never fully know, but we're trying to get closer and closer to it. And whether you're a Christian or not, we're all trying to do that. Something interesting about the sort of Christian worldview in a way, which I think Chris and Phil in particular mentioned, was the Bible. A lot of it seems to revolve around the Bible, this old book that's written over such a long time. It's now like a long time since anyone's added to it, and don't think anyone's going to get to pop anything in it anymore. We seem to hold to that as our basis and our groundwork. But why? So this is one of the top questions. Why should we believe the Bible is true? And maybe we'll get some thoughts from a couple of you guys, but maybe Chris, you haven't spoken in a while now, unfortunately. But you mentioned that. Do you have any thoughts on why should we believe that the Bible has truth to be learned?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, why should we believe the Bible is true? Well, I think that there's, Phil mentioned about historians. There is critical text that people dig into to find exactly that out. So some people would claim, for example, that the Bible was kind of written in a dark room with a few guys on one evening, and yeah, actually, the kind of the evidence that anyone could really discover, you can find out, is that it's just not true. And one of the things is that maybe perhaps the Bible has been changed over time, so people can change it. And yet, in the Qumran caves, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the sort of late 1800s, early 1900s, and at that time, these basically volcano had erupted and kind of covered over all these Dead Sea Scrolls. And when they uncovered it, these things that had been buried and hidden for sort of 1,000 years or 2,000 years were unearthed. And you could say, well, if the Bible had been changed, then those things should be different to the Bible that we have today. And yet what they found was that when they checked it, it was like 99 point something % accurate to the Bible that we read. And so with a little bit of digging in, it's possible to find that actually some of these things that it's easy to kind of say, oh yeah, well of course the Bible's been changed over millions of years or over thousands of years. Actually, when you look into it, well, there's evidence to suggest that that is not true. And there's lots of evidence to show us, just like, I mean, how do we know anything in history happened? How do we know that anyone called Julius Caesar was around, or Pontius Pilate, or Henry VIII? How do you know? Well, it's because people recorded it and wrote it down. And you can look into history and you can look at the evidence and you can unearth and you can look, time, date, paper and stuff like that to work out roughly how accurate it is. And the evidence for the Bible, I mean, it is just vast. And so very few historians, like very, very few would say that it's the Bible wasn't written when it was written, and or even that it's been changed. The question is, like Phil posed, was is it? Can you believe it? Can you put your trust in it? And as a historical document, and then if you do agree there's an historical document, then I guess you need to decide. The next question is, can I trust what it says? Is what it says does it have anything to say to me? Can it be relevant? Yeah. So there you go. That's what I have to say about that.
That's good. I'm happy to add just
open it up.
Just a little bit of something. Was just to say that the whole Bible isn't just one factual document. That it's made up of 66 books written by several different authors at different times over 6,000 years, and in different genres. So you've got some genres that are poetry, and whether you call that fact, it's got to be read differently. Just like you go into a newspaper and you find that you've got facts, but you've also got obituaries, which are about stories of people who've lived. You've got the cartoons, which aren't fact. You've got the weather, which is predictive. So you've got to go into the Bible and you've got to figure out what you're reading, who is it written to, in what culture, and then that will answer a lot of questions. And then you go, well, it's not necessarily that's a manual for your life now. So it is a complex document, and I think it has truth in it, and everything in it is important and is vital for a Christian to dig into. But if you're going to read everything in it as this sort of manual for your life, you're going to get confused very, very quickly. Not saying there's not things for your life, but you've got to work out what the intention of the author, why it was written, and things like that as well. Kind of like what you do with any book that you're reading as well. You've got to work out what the author is trying to tell you and why. And so I just put that into a little bit of context, that the Bible is there to be engaged with and really explored, not just read in one straight, easy way. I hope that's helpful.
That's great. And that really gets to the heart, I think, of what it means for something to be true. It's not about maybe the individual thing itself, but how it relates to you, how it marries up with reality. I think we're looking at something a bit broader than statements or facts or rules that would or would not be true. So I think you touched on that a little bit there. And just to open up with the questions on Slido, feel free to ask anything at all. We can go off piste and we'll bring it back round. But any questions you've got at all, feel free to shoot them in there. But one other question we've got in is, what did Jesus mean when he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life"? How can a person be truth? Maybe Claire or Lily, would you like to go for that one?
I can give it a start. I guess I alluded to a verse really similar to that when I was speaking before. Yeah, that sounds bonkers, doesn't it? For somebody to say they're the truth. We don't really hear that very often. But I guess what all of us have alluded to is that is what is quite unique to Christianity, is that Jesus claims to be the truth. And you have to remember, Jesus was a person that was on earth in a particular time period, but we also believe that Jesus is God. Now, this is one of the biggest claims of Christianity. So if you want to investigate that, please do. Just Google one of the Gospels, Mark, Luke, Matthew, or John, if you want to look at that further. But that's kind of one of the most wonderful things about Jesus, is that he is saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Not only is he someone, or like he's not somebody just to like live your life by, like a little set of guidelines, a little set of rules to follow. He's more than that. He's saying that he is the truth. And I guess that's what we want to say to you guys tonight. There is so much going around. It's really hard to know what is real and what is truth. What I have found in being a follower of Jesus and being a Christian, that what Jesus says about himself has made me understand the world in a way, that I can't even comprehend how good it is. I don't know if Lily has anything to add or anybody else has anything better to say than me.
I think the last point that you've just made, I find really helpful when I read the things that Jesus talks about in the Gospels. And again, as Claire said as well, it was written in a certain time, in a certain culture, that we need to keep that in mind as well. But reading the things that Jesus says and interpreting the world around me through that lens, actually, I feel gives me a much clearer sense of what is going on. And I feel that this shows the world as it is in a way. And I think that is hopefully something that explains that how can a person be a truth. Yeah, I don't know if the others have some other thoughts, but I think reading things through that lens actually helped me to make sense of this world and to put things into perspective as well.
On that question, actually, I'm no Greek scholar, but I've heard there's a Greek literary device called hendiasis, whereby, as opposed to saying two adjectives and a noun, you might say three nouns, but two of the nouns function as an adjective. So I might say, this wine is nice and cold. I don't really mean that it's nice, I mean that it's cold, but it's nicely cold. And so some suggest that what Jesus is saying here, because it's in response to someone saying, we don't know where we're going, so how can we know the way? Jesus is saying, I'm the way, I'm the truth-giving and life-giving way. So it's potentially more of a description, but take that as you will. He's the truthful way. He's the true way to follow, the true way to heaven, the true way to live. I'm welcoming some comeback on that one. Bit heretical, maybe. But yeah.
No,
we've
it's good.
We've got questions. One that's very popular, which is quite a big question, but I'll pop it out. How is God all loving? And then the follow up with that is, why won't he let everyone love the way that they want? So how is God all loving? And then why won't he let everyone else love the way that they want?
Can whoever wrote that question try to explain what is meant with the second part, because, or maybe you guys know what is meant with the second part, but I don't quite understand why won't he let everyone love the way they want. I don't quite understand that.
It could. I'm reading it two ways. It could either be a typo that it's meant to be live the way they want, or it could be love the way they want, as in any relationship goes, which is a big question as well.
Should we go with live the way they want? And then we can try later to come back.
If they want another question, then go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a stab
go on,
at it
Chris.
first. Yeah, I was just going to say that. So, I mean, it kind of goes together, really, in that, say, some people believe that if you were to really show love, then the way to show that love would be to not have any kind of boundaries, or not have any expectations on the person that you love. And so therefore, for God to love people, he should basically let them run free and run wild. And yet, that is just not true for what we would see in the world as what love really is. And you can take a simple relationship like a parent and a child. I have two children and they're great and I love them dearly. And because I love them, I will put boundaries in place in their life. I will give them a context for living. I will make sure that I discipline them, even if they are going to do something that's going to be potentially harmful to them, like run across the road. You know, I will make sure that my love is enacted, is given in a way that makes sure that they are cared for, that they are cherished, that they are safe. And my children don't always understand that. There are things that there are boundaries that I put in place. Like when they go to the park, I say to them, that's all where you can go. You can't go any further. They look further and they think, well, but it looks really nice over there. It looks great over there. I'd love to explore that. And no, there's reasons why, but they don't know the reasons. And yet I do. And I put those things in place because I love them. And so how is God all loving? Well, he's all. How is it? I mean, that's a tough question. God is all loving. That's who he is, and he expresses that love much like parents express love. He expresses that by giving us freedom, but also giving us boundaries and a context in which to enjoy that freedom. And so, can I live whatever way I want? Well, I absolutely can. You've been given free will and free choice, and yet God also gives you a context for how best to live. And so it's easy to see those things as rules, but you could also see them as a framework to enjoy the freedom that he has given you in the first place. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that. If that's just on that first question, I think it's almost like a misinterpretation of a verse that says God is love. God being love doesn't mean he is all loving in the sense that everything goes. So in the sense that if I say, it's kind of an assumption, if I'm all loving, then I'm just going to let things slide. But if God is love, if that's what is meant by the Bible, which I think it is, when it says God is love, it means that we will find what love is, the very definition of love, in God. And so through the Christian claim, again, going to this claim, if Jesus is alive and is the Son of God, it means that here's a little bit of a summary. We believe God is one being in three persons. So the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are all God, the being. They are all in community with each other, all worthy of worship. And therefore, even without humanity, God is love. It only makes sense that God is in community to have love. You need more than one partner to have love. And so if God is love, we, in relationship with Jesus, when we mean the word relationship, we find our ultimate purpose, our ultimate meaning, and life itself when we are invited into that love. And so we then go, well, what does that look like? Well, love doesn't mean affirming everything about the other person. So I can be a really good friend to someone, but not like all their movie choices, not affirm all their decisions in life. Actually, some of my friends, for various different reasons, at very different points, wind me up for different reasons, because they do things that I don't like, or I do things that they don't like, and we end up with a bit of a battle on who's right. Well, when it comes to God, he's perfect. He knows what is best for us. His purposes are good. And therefore, when we enter into a relationship with God, he's the perfect one. And we should be the ones that change to go in line with his purposes and what he intends for us. So it makes more sense that if God's perfect, that we're the ones that need to change. And therefore, we can't necessarily live the way, or even love the way we want, because we only find ultimate meaning, ultimate love, ultimate purpose in who God is. That'll be my answer.
Nice. Thanks so much, Phil.
No worries.
Great stuff. Those questions coming in, guys. Yeah, we're going to move on to another question, a bit of a different theme again. But I suppose, how, with all that's going on in the world at the moment, how would Christianity give you hope in all of the things that are going on right now?
Mm. Shall I jump in on that one, as
Go
I
on,
kind
Lily,
of raised
go.
it? I think that's such a good question, and I think it's so good that you're looking for hope. To say yes, the Bible and the person of Jesus gives me hope. Sometimes that comes through more than it comes through on other days. Sometimes I'm really struggling with what, all the stuff that is going on in this world. But to say this world is not just starting to be in a mess, it's always been in a mess. And things have been hard for a lot of people around this world. Um, for the last 10, 20, 100,000 years. It's not always been, obviously, we are faced kind of in this worldwide crisis, but people have been suffering um, for most of their lives around this globe. So it's not a unique situation we're in a way, but I want to say as well, it is absolutely okay to struggle and not to find it easy. But coming to the question that was actually asked, how does Christianity give me hope in all this stuff the world is going through right now? The Bible actually says in a part that's called Romans, there is a whole chapter on hope. But one of the things they write in there, Paul writes to a church in Rome, that's why it's called Romans, we continue to shout our praise even when we're hemmed in with troubles, because we know how troubles can develop passionate patience in us, and how that patience in turn forges the tempered steel to virtue, keeping us alert for whatever God will do next. An alert expectancy such as this, we're never left feeling shortchanged. Quite the contrary. We can't round up enough containers to hold everything God generously pours into our lives through the Holy Spirit. So basically what Paul says here is that in really tough times, we still continue to praise God because we know that he is going to give us hope. And ultimately, we have this big vision in the Bible as well, in the last part of the Bible in Revelations, where it talks about eventually God is going to make this world okay again, and he's going to wipe away all the tears, and all evil is going to be gone, and there's a final word, and the final word is going to say that thing, or is going to make things okay again. So I think, yeah, two ways I would answer that question. Firstly, in this situation, we know that God is good and that we have this purpose in him. And when we are in a relationship with him, we know even when we're going through hard times, doesn't mean that God isn't good anymore, but that he is still good and we can trust in his goodness. Whether that works out for us and we're going to see his goodness in tomorrow, whether we're going to have to wait for him to come through in certain situations. But also we know ultimately there is this hope that one day God is going to restore this world again, and he's going to wipe away all the tears, and there won't be any suffering anymore. So it is about finding those things in the here and now, but also knowing there's an ultimate hope. One really practical tip I think is, and that was a little bit in that passage as well, that actually we find things in the day-to-day that we still feel God is blessing us with. And it's something that I think mental health people talk about as well a lot, to practice gratitude, not just to focus on all the stuff that is really hard, but actually the things that are good in the situation. And I think that's something really practical that we can do as Christians. We probably say that God has given us those things. I believe that God has blessed us with good weather today, that he blessed us with a health today as well. That we don't take those things for granted, but actually focusing on those things that we can be grateful for, I think is something really practical we can do, that hopefully helps us in the here and now, to know that God is still good. He is faithful. He blesses us with good things. But if we can't see the goodness of God in certain situations and we're still struggling, there's ultimately the good news of Jesus, knowing that eventually he is going to wipe away all the tears. There won't be any bad stuff anymore in this world when we believe that Jesus is coming back. But that's a whole different topic I'm not going to go into.
Thanks a lot, Lily.
Awesome.
That is awesome. And I want to draw you guys' attention to on the Slido. We have an active poll, so we want to get you guys a little bit involved. We've been talking about truth. We've been talking about whether it's real, whether you can, whether it's actually out there, but also whether we can know it. So, can we know what is and isn't true? Give us your vote on the slido.com. If you've lost it, you can go to the link that's coming on the screen at the bottom, linktr.ee/USCU. At the moment, we've got a 75% yes, and then that one person is not sure. Fair enough.
Fair enough.
We've got a good 15 minutes.
It's flickering back and forth. Can I just add something to that hope thing, just very quickly?
Yeah, please. And just before you do, I'll just draw, while you're on the link tree, we also have a follow-up form, which I'll say a little bit more about at the end, but we just want to keep the conversation going. And if you want to pop your details in, we'd love to continue this chat and maybe get to know you as well. But Chris, go. Not Chris.
Oh, that's weird. I'll be Chris for now. Yeah, just on that, I think the question seems to imply that things aren't going very well, and I think in this moment we can feel all sorts of mixed emotions. I know people that are loving lockdown because they're fairly introverted, and it just means they have an excuse to stay inside and read books. I know people that are terrified by COVID and the fact that it might kill them or someone that they love. And I know people that are very much indifferent to this whole situation that we're in. But I think it would be wrong to think that COVID is the only thing that causes suffering right now. And there's a lot of people facing all sorts of different issues. And so what I would ask of you, if it's you, to read the Bible, the Bible from the first few pages of Genesis all the way through to Revelation is very real when it comes to suffering and pain. It gives an explanation as to potentially why a God of love can allow this for now. And Lily gave a hint as to the hope we have. But also you see people wrestling with that question. There's Psalms like Psalm 88, I think it is, where it ends on a statement of darkness is my closest friend. We've got books like Job, which talks about a guy who loses everything and wrestles with this idea of, God, how have you left me in this state? So the Bible is very, very real when it comes to living in a world that isn't as it should be. And so the Christian hope is one that's very realistic, that even God himself knows suffering and death and will walk with you through it. And so that is the hope, that even in the deepest, darkest place where darkness is your closest friend, the hope is actually that Jesus is in that place with you and walking with you and giving you strength to walk through it. And if it is a personal question, if that's something you're wrestling with, please do talk to people. That's why we're part of the chaplaincy team. That's why we're part of church. We care for people, and we want people to know that there is a purpose for them, a value for their life, and a God who loves them and cares for them and will walk with you through deepest suffering. So just I hope that's helpful, but the Bible can hold up your suffering.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. Phil or Chris, I forget. Really good. We've got
Chris Phil. I'll be like a double namer for this one.
Question just come in from Anon. Someone called Anon is crikey, got a lot of questions. But the question is on sort of suffering and meaning, which is a big question again that maybe would be good to address. We'll do probably 2-3 more questions tonight. So if you've got any final things, do chuck them in and do put your answers to that poll up. But the question is, if there was no suffering, would happiness not be meaningless? If there was a world without suffering, would that make happiness meaningless? Anyone feeling brave?
Chris.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if there was, I mean, I think a good question is, if there was no suffering, then would happiness be meaningless? This is what I'm going to say. Sorry, is that I believe that the reason why there is suffering actually points us to a God. So, i.e., if there was no suffering, then there would be effectively no God. And because there is a God, I think that's why people experience suffering. So, let me just expand that a little bit more. If God doesn't exist, then, and we really are just random mutated cells come together with no purpose, no real meaning, they were all an accident, and that our very existence is just random chance. And then, if I was to get run over, then why should anyone really mourn me? I was a mistake anyway. Like, I was only here by accident anyway. I believe that the reason why people experience suffering, why they have a deep sense of injustice when, like, disasters happen, when they feel really grieved, on Remembrance Day, when they're mourning people that they never even knew, and are remembering them, is because there is value in life. Actually, every single person has value and dignity and honor, and because of that very kind of foundational belief that has transcended all cultures and time spans and countries, actually points us to the fact that we know that we are made for something greater than this, and that suffering is an affront to what we should be experiencing. And but that's certainly a philosophical question, that if there was no suffering, would there also, if there was no suffering, would there never be any unhappiness? Maybe not. Certainly that if there's no God, then I believe there's no suffering. But because there's a God, that's why we suffer.
It sounds quite Eastern mysticism type, that wrestle with that idea that suffering is happiness, that in a little bit of bad there's a bit of good, and in a bit of good there's a bit of bad, that kind of idea. But I think very much Chris has given a very Christian understanding of why suffering actually means anything at all. The Christian claim answers it basically, that one day there will be no more suffering, no more death, no more mourning, and we will be truly happy, and that's what we call eternal life. So the answer is, if there was no suffering, would happiness not be meaningless? No, life would be meaningful, but only when we experience it in full with God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also think it is quite an abstract idea, because we obviously have never experienced that. Because any happiness that I think all experience at the moment, there's always this fleeting sense of, well, tomorrow's going to be over, or I have this exam coming up next week, or whatever. So I think we don't really know what it means. We don't really know what it feels like. So I think it's quite an abstract question to really say yes or no to it. Yeah.
It strikes me as something fundamentally part of being human, that would be hard to separate from the rest of the human experience. So we have to work with the context that we're given, but all up for a thought experiment, and the philosophical questions are always welcome. Let's check in on that poll, see how we're doing. If we could get that up on screen, we are going to see what we're thinking about what is and isn't true. So just over half of us, 57%, yes, we can know what is and isn't true. 14% say no, we can never know. And then that 30%, we're still not sure. And hopefully this is raising some good questions about...
So can you not know for definite that something's not true?
A lot
Too
of
many
no's and nots
negatives,
in there.
Phil.
So can we know what is not true?
Statement.
No, I can't know that statement is true. So yeah, I'm just confusing things.
Are you saying it's a self-refuting statement that you can't
It
know
can
what's
be.
true?
If you
That
can't know
itself,
what's true, can you know that it in itself is true?
no. So they should have put not sure. Is that what you're saying?
That's probably the most honest. Like it's like saying, I know I was just kind of playing with the question in my head, so happy for people to completely dispute this, but it's like saying there is no absolute truth, but that in itself is an absolute truth statement.
Mm.
So therefore, something is absolutely true, and you end up with this sort of self-refuting aspect to it. Just some thoughts.
To back them up, I might say that the question is actually, can we know? So it could be true, but we just can't know it, perhaps. But food for thought. Why do people say that? We're going to move on to maybe a second to last question before we think about wrapping up. But a question back to this person of Jesus. Someone called Wade has asked, they said, I struggle to believe in Jesus, as in, how did he rise from the dead? So they struggle to believe in Jesus. How did he rise from the dead?
One of the biggest conundrums, I think, of our universe era. There's lots of ways, I guess, you can look into the rising of Jesus from the dead, and I hope everyone agrees with me here on this panel. Like that's like one of the central claims of Christianity, that Jesus died and rose again. In the end, there's lots of ways we can explore this. I think some of my favourite ways of believing it's true is how he told people when he'd risen from the dead. So one of the first people, the first person, in fact, that he revealed himself to after he had risen was a woman named Mary. That seems pretty average and plain today, but you have to remember that in that context, in Middle Eastern culture, a woman's words were not real, were not true in a court of law. So a woman could be taken to court and could not be believed, because just how the culture and the context worked at that time meant that they just didn't have any say in a law way. That was very bad. That was a very bad way of explaining that. But why that's so kind of amazing is that why would somebody who claims to be God, who is Jesus, who walked the earth, decide to reveal himself first to a woman whose words would not have been taken seriously in a court of law? And yet he decided to do that. That's one thing to think about. A second thing to think about is what has happened to the church since. So there's a book in the Bible called Acts. It tells us a little bit of the history of the early church. I'm a bit of a history boffin, so I'm sorry if I bore you. But the reason why that's interesting is that even after Jesus died, people were willing to die at the stake, to die really brutal deaths, because they claimed what Jesus said was true. And I believe we live here as a result. I live here as a result of those people standing firm in that belief. So that's food for thought. I don't know if anyone's got anything else to add on that subject.
I wonder if the question is actually a struggle to believe in Jesus as in if he rose from the dead and not how. Because obviously the how we don't know. Really, the Bible just talks about that God raised him from the dead. So I think it's probably more the if, and I think Claire, you spoke on that already quite a bit.
I think the way the Bible does say it. Oh, sorry, go, Chris. You go for it.
No,
I've talked too much and I've confused people about truth, so you crack on.
I mean, I thought those things that Claire posed just then were really, really helpful, and she's absolutely spot on. You know, that if Jesus rose from the dead and that could be refuted, then why would he then reveal himself to to a woman, and why would so many people be willing to die for that truth? And if they just made it up, if they just, if they kind of stole the body and hid it somewhere, then surely at some point one of them would have cracked, and one of them would be like, do you know what, it's not worth me dying for that. And so I think that's really, really helpful. Yeah, how was he raised from the dead? Well, it was supernatural, and fundamentally it sounds foolish. It just sounds ridiculous. And do you know what? The Bible says exactly that. That if this is the crux of the Christian faith, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, then the Bible tells us that we are utter fools, that we are the most pitied amongst all men in the whole world if it is not true. And yet the Bible then tells us that it is true. And because it's true, actually, we have got really great news. The gospel is called the good news, that we can go and we can share with people that there was a man who lived that, no, he wasn't just a good teacher. He claimed to be God, which was punishable by death, which is why he was kind of crucified ultimately anyway. And when you follow him and put your trust in him, because he's the truth, actually you will find hope even beyond the grave. And so in the midst of coronavirus, in the midst of suffering, in the midst of pandemic, it's linking to the last question, actually, that even on our deathbed, even when loved ones are dying, even when ourselves are going through those final moments, actually there's hope beyond the grave, because this isn't it. And how can we trust that this isn't it? Well, because it wasn't it for Jesus, that after 3 days he defeated death, he rose again, and he promises that resurrection hope. And so ultimately it kind of comes right back to the beginning, to what Phil was saying about faith. Ultimately we all have to trust, am I really here or aren't I? On the basis of the evidence that you know right now about the internet, about the people that have set this up, then you can, on the basis of all that you know, take that step of faith and trust that I am who I am and what I'm saying is what I'm saying. And that is very similar to Christianity, that on the basis of all that you see, what you read, what you experience, you can come to the point where you say, on the basis of everything, I do believe that Jesus must have rose from the dead on account of all that happened afterwards, and also through my experience, and the worldview that's then portrayed through the Bible.
Awesome.
Cheers.
The thing is, just on that last point, on that how he rose from the dead, the Christian worldview is that death isn't how God created creation. Like right in the beginning, he gave, whether symbolically or physically, there's a debate within Christianity for that, but the idea is that God gave humanity the tree of life so that they would be able to live with God forever. And so we see that at the end in Revelation as well. The tree of life comes back, but death wasn't that came in with like the mess of the world. And so death is something that needed to be dealt with. And the Bible handles death in a few ways. It kind of gives it, almost personifies death as an enemy that has to be dealt with. So the Christian faith is very much a life or death thing. You have life with God and you live that forever, or you reject God and there's death. And in the garden, the whole thing with the garden is that they rejected God, and you'll see in Genesis 3, there's a phrase that says, you are nothing but dust, and to dust you will return. And they are removed from the place where the tree of life was, lest they should live forever. So there's this idea within Christianity that our longing, or the reason that we hate suffering, the reason why we find death so upsetting, the reason that we don't want death to be a part of life, is because we were made for so much more. We were made for a place where death will be no more. But to do that, something needs to happen with our rebellion. And I saw there's another question on that, so we might deal with that in a moment. But something needs to happen so that we're no longer, the death that we kind of face is dealt with, because we can't face death on our own because we'll die. But Jesus was able to almost step into death for us and defeated it. And so the phrase that the Bible uses on the how question is that God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. So we are held in death by what we do wrong, our rebellion against God. But Jesus was perfect, and therefore death could not hold him, and he defeated death on our behalf. So yeah, keep those two things in tension there. That how did he rise from the dead? Well, he is God. So that's how.
Neat trick.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
Guys, thanks. We are going to not wrap up yet. We're going to do one more question at the end. Thanks so much for sticking with us if you're tuning in at home. Hope you're enjoying the conversation, and it's helping you think about things. And it's what we want to do as a Christian Union. We want to open up the conversation about truth, about life, about God, how we make sense of it all. We also want to just help you out. We want to be here for you as friends, as a community. We are a community who meet. We have church. We're in churches in Guildford who meet. We'd love to get you connected in with the church, just because it's a great way to do life and be supported, and to follow Jesus together. That's why I mentioned the follow-up form. If you want to fill out some details, we'd love to help you out. If you want to just talk to someone, meet up with someone, if you're feeling lonely or isolated, if you need anything, we would love to help you. And there's so many of us ready to do that. Also, if you have questions, we want to help you as much as we want to help each other navigate the big questions of life, like we're doing now. So we're going to whack. We're going to whack? What we're going to whack? I don't even know.
I've no idea. I'm old.
My brain is frazzled by all this truth talk. But we're going to keep whacking these events up on the YouTube. And if you want to engage with them, chat to your friends about them, chat to us about them, that'd be great. So yeah, do fill out the form on the link. All that to say, we have one more question. Have you guys, we're going to go around, I think, and each of you would like to give an answer, that'd be great. Has anything ever happened to you that has reaffirmed Christianity as being the right faith for you? And if I could just add in there, maybe this idea of truth is hard to gauge, and looking at the poll, I think there's still about 26% of us aren't sure whether we can even attain truth, whether we can even know what's true. But is there anything for you where truth has met you and you've decided, yeah, Christianity is true, that makes sense for me? Whoever wants to go first, then jump in.
I can go, might as well. I guess two things really is, one is maybe a more practical thing. So I studied ancient history, and so being a history buff, that means you learn about the Romans. One day I was in a lecture, and at this point I was already a Christian, so I'd been thinking about Jesus for a while. But my lecturer quoted from the Bible. Now, I don't know what she believed or not, but in that moment, I realised my lecturer, who is teaching at a university that is not remotely connected to Christianity at all, is choosing to use something from the Bible as a piece of evidence to explain about a culture and about a context we were learning about the Romans. And I remember sitting in that lecture and thinking, oh, she's choosing to use something that I've been believing for a lot of my life. And I guess that really affirmed to me in that moment that not only is the Bible true for me, but people that care about history, that care about evidence, are choosing to use it. And then I guess you can ask your friends, if you've got any friends in the Christian Union, this is a great question to ask your friends as well. We love hearing stories. We love hearing personal experiences. And I think just having been a Christian for a little while now, like 10 years, I think I've just seen how he's guide my life, even to me deciding to move to Guildford. I feel like through a series of events that happened because of God's providence. So ask your friends, don't just ask us, who you probably won't see that often. Ask that of your friends as well.
Who's next? I'll share a little bit. I guess it's recognizing that it's a bit of a journey. So for me, I grew up in a Christian family overseas, and when I came back to the UK for university, I had to kind of figure out whether it was my own faith. There's probably many of you are finding that you leave home and you have to start figuring out, well, what do you actually believe? And so I had a lot of answers and I knew a lot of stuff. And I'd say I had a little bit of a personal experience before coming to England. But having just personal experience will kind of tilt you one way. And if it's just personal experience, well, when that personal experience ends, it's not really going to hold through suffering or things like that. But at the time at university, I had a close mate who challenged me by the fact that he was a new Christian and read loads and seemed to know more about who Jesus was than I did, and challenged me to read the Gospels, to look at this thing called apologetics, to engage with the thoughts of Christian philosophers and evidence for the Gospels. And Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. Most questions have been discussed and fairly rigorously as well. So there's a lot of clever people who have dealt with these questions, and so I found I could start to trust them, and I could start to, even though I'm not a historian or I'm not, I haven't spent my life digging in the same way, like with Greek and all the stuff that's needed to necessarily go right into the Bible. But I've started to trust these people that have gone before me, and trust the people that have been even seen Jesus. And so I have personal experience, and then I have also this trust on what the Bible says, and so it's this mix. And then also I'd say I have the church. And so my personal experience is backed up by the people around me who I love and trust, and then also the Bible. And it's these things that all kind of mix together to form that actually this is a reasonable thing to believe in, and it's trustworthy. It makes sense of the world better, I would claim, than anything else that I've come across, seen, engaged with. And though I don't have all the answers, I've tested this out for a good number of years now, and I'm pretty convinced that it's a good way to live. And yeah, that'd be my answer.
Class. Thanks so much.
I was just thinking about this question, as we should be doing when we're thinking about an answer. But I think one of the things I was thinking is that it's not just one thing that has happened, certainly in my life, but it's so many things. And I think being a Christian means that I believe in a good God who loves me, who gives me a purpose for my life, who deals with the stuff that is going on in the world, who puts things in perspective and helps me to understand that I'm not the center of the world, thank God for that, but that there is someone who is good, who is in control, and who is faithful to no matter what is going on. And I think really that reaffirms me in that this is the person I want to follow, this good God who has given everything for me. And as I look back through my life, I'm not super old. I'm in my 30s, so I can look back on 30 years of being on this journey with God and with Jesus, is that there are so many little pieces of the puzzle, and they only make sense when I put them together under this perspective of God is in control. Otherwise, similar to what Claire said, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be married to my husband. I wouldn't have the son I have. And that just all makes sense looking through this perspective of there is a good God who is faithful and who calls me and who gives me purpose in my life, and who brings me back into this, as Phil said as well, who places me in this puzzle of church. And describes or explains my life through the lens of the Bible as well, and other things. So I think it is a lot of little things and some big things as well, which I'm happy to share personally. So yeah, so many things that have reaffirmed me that I want to be a follower of Jesus for the rest of my life.
Awesome.
Okay, so just to wrap up the four of us then. So for me, having begun my journey as an intellectual journey of, what makes the most sense, what about all the religions going all around, I found myself doing something called an Alpha course, which is an introductory course to Christianity, and it's about 8 to 10 weeks long, where you can basically, they take different topics like suffering, like God, how can God be three in one, and all that kind of stuff, and you explore all these things. And to be honest, I was on this, and some of my questions were answered and quite a lot weren't, and more than that, I ended up having much more answers than or much more questions, sorry, than answers. And so but what happened to me, what reaffirmed that Christianity is right for me, was on the inside of my heart. I just knew it. There was this moment when I was sitting there with an 80-year-old, a 45-year-old, and a 20-year-old, and all of them had recently put their trust in God, and I could just see the transformation that had happened in their lives. And God spoke to me in that moment, and then a few days later, I was in a prison cell. I was doing stupid stuff, like I mentioned at the beginning of this session, and I remember just God speaking to me on the inside and kind of saying, like, "Come and live for me, and I will set you free, and you won't be trapped figuratively by these walls, but we're going to go on an adventure." And ever since, like Lily, there's been multiple occasions where God has just reaffirmed that He is real, that He is trustworthy, that He's good. And for all the questions I had, actually, there was really, it just came down to, I just knew it. I just knew it. I just knew in my heart, in my soul, and my spirit that God was real. It's kind of like He spoke to me, not audibly, but I guess a sense of peace, His presence in my life, which, to be honest, I can't explain. And it sounds ridiculous and it sounds wacky, but that's just what it was for me. And so even if I haven't got all the answers to suffering, or all the answers to how the world's going to end, or how the world was started, you know what? It doesn't matter, because I know that I know, and I'm willing to live the rest of my life trusting that the God of the Bible is God, and that His word is trustworthy. And do you know what? If I die and none of it is true, well, what have I lost? What have I lost? I've enjoyed a great life. I've been on an adventure with Him, enjoying His freedom within this context, and I found it to be good every single step of the way, even if it is somewhat challenging at times.
Amazing. And yeah, that's what we're all looking for, isn't it? Something that aligns with our reality, something to believe. And yeah, thank you guys so much for all that you've shared tonight. We warmly appreciate you and what you've spoken. If you have any more questions, I know there's a fair few on the Slido that we haven't been able to get through tonight. Barring a future event, do get in touch with us on our Instagram. We're at SurreyCU. Via the link tree. When this event's over, we're going to have our usual links to all the ways to get involved and our Instagram, etc. And we look forward to seeing you at another event, or seeing you over a coffee and having some more conversations. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you have a great evening, and that's goodbye from all of us.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Come find us in the chaplaincy.
Bye.